It started like a joke. You walk out to your long, dusty ranch road just to check the mail, and bam, your mailbox is face down again. Mangled, crushed, not by accident, not by weather, but by something that had tire marks. This was the third time in 2 weeks. And I knew exactly who had done it. Again, it wasn't kids. It wasn't vandals. It was the so-called HOA patrol, those self-declared enforcers who drove around our rural neighborhood in marked SUVs like they were the sheriff's department. They weren't cops, but they sure acted like it. Lights on the roof, clipboards in hand, mirrored sunglasses, the whole performance. The only thing they were missing was an actual badge. Now, technically, I live on land that isn't under HOA control. My ranch borders their territory, but my mailbox happens to sit just a few feet past the imaginary line they drew. And ever since I refused to let them install one of their ugly plastic signs on my fence last year, they've had it out for me. I didn't play by their rules, so they made up new ones. At first, I thought maybe the damage was just a weird coincidence. You live out in the open like this, anything can happen. Maybe a delivery truck backed into it. Maybe a drunk driver swerved too far off the gravel. Maybe even a cow got loose. But after the second time, when the post was snapped clean in half and there were very obvious black scuff marks across the mailbox door, I knew this wasn't a random accident. The third time, I waited. I actually sat in my truck with the engine off, parked behind the tree line near the edge of the road, just to see, just to be sure. And sure enough, just after 6 a.m., here comes the HOA SUV. They didn't even slow down. Tires kicked up dust. And then it happened again. They nudged the mailbox with the corner of their front bumper, like they were barely trying to hide it, and drove right on like nothing happened. Now, I'm not a confrontational guy. I mind my business. I take care of my land. I respect others. But this was personal. I had warned them before, told them to stay off my property, told them they had no legal right to enforce anything on this side of the ranch fence. But here they were, taking their little power trip one step too far. It was weird, too. They never left notes, never filed reports, never admitted fault. They just rolled through, pretend to inspect a tree or measure someone's driveway, then casually flattened my mailbox like it was some kind of game. And when I called the HOA office to complain, you know what they said? We'll look into it. That was their answer. Every time. And you know what made me even more sure? My neighbor across the road, fully within HOA limits, told me he saw the same SUV parked in front of my mailbox the morning before. Looked like they were taking pictures of it, he said, right before it got crushed again. Coincidence? I didn't think so. So here's the thing about country folks. We don't just sit back and take hits. You mess with our land, our livestock, or our family, we push back. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. I wanted my peace and quiet back. And more than anything, I wanted a mailbox that would finally outlast their childish nonsense. But I didn't yell. I didn't chase them. I didn't even warn them. Not this time. I just started planning. While they played petty games, I pulled out my tape measure, dug into rancher forums, watched videos from folks who had their own share of mailbox battles. Turns out, there's a whole underground world of people who've been through this. Plow drivers, HOA bullies, drunk neighbors, and each of them found their own unique way to fight back. With steel, with concrete, with strategy. I wasn't going to build a mailbox. I was going to build a message, one they wouldn't see coming. I didn't waste time. The next morning, I drove into town, stopped by the hardware store, and walked straight to the back, where they keep the good stuff. Not the flimsy aluminum mailbox kits. I'm talking about heavy-duty steel posts, industrial-grade bolts, and concrete mix so dense it could hold a cattle gate in a hurricane. The clerk gave me a weird look when I asked how much pressure a post could withstand before snapping. I just smiled and said, hypothetically, asking for a friend. He grinned back like he knew exactly what I meant. When I got back to the ranch, I pulled the old broken mailbox out of the ground one last time. The post was splintered. The box dented like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. I tossed it in the barn. Then I went to work. First, I dug the new hole. Not shallow like the last one. No, This one went deep, over 3 feet down, just above the frost line. I widened it enough to drop in a thick steel pipe I had cut earlier. Not hollow like a fence post. This was solid core, like the kind they use to anchor highway signs. I bolted a mounting plate to the top and welded a frame where the mailbox would sit, just high enough to meet the legal height requirement. Then came the concrete. I didn't just pour and leave it. I packed it in layers, mixed with gravel, and let it cure slowly. No movement. No tilt. The base was set like bedrock. The kind of mailbox that doesn't fall over when a pickup clips it. The kind of thing that makes a driver regret their life choices. But I didn't stop there. I added a rubber shock plate between the post and the mailbox mount. That way, if they did try to hit it again, the box would absorb the impact, bounce slightly, and maybe, just maybe, return the favor. Rancher ingenuity, borrowed from years of dealing with cattle gates and roaming bulls. By sunset, the project was done. It didn't look flashy. It looked like a mailbox. A perfectly legal, totally boring mailbox sitting on the edge of a quiet gravel road. But underneath that basic metal box, it was a fortress. And I was ready. I didn't tell anyone. Not my neighbors. Not the guy at the feed store. Not even my cousin who usually hears every ranch story within a 10-mile radius. This wasn't about bragging. This was about waiting, watching. And the next morning, like clockwork, they came back. I saw the SUV through binoculars before I heard it. Same model. Same HOA sticker in the back window. They slowed near the bend, just before my property line, then coasted up beside the mailbox. I held my breath, even though I knew what was about to happen. They tried the same move again. The slight nudge. The careless push with the bumper. Only this time, the mailbox didn't flinch. Instead, the SUV jolted back a little. Hard enough to rock the front end. Not enough to set off airbags, but enough that you could see the driver stiffen. They stopped, sat there for a moment, engine running, probably confused. I could only imagine what was going through their heads. They'd knocked that box over so many times. They probably thought it was just weak by design, disposable. But now they were the ones facing something immovable. And it wasn't just a mailbox. It was a fact that someone finally stood up to them. Eventually, they drove off. Didn't even get out to inspect it. Just rolled forward and disappeared over the hill like nothing had happened. No damage to my mailbox. No tire marks. Just dust settling back onto gravel. That evening, I checked it again. Not a scratch. Not a dent. Just a shiny new mailbox that did exactly what it was meant to do. Stand tall, stay firm, and remind them I'm not someone to mess with. Still, I knew this wasn't over. These HOA folks, they don't like being outsmarted, especially not by someone they thought they could push around. I had made my move. Now I just had to wait for theirs. A few days went by without any sign of them. No drive-bys. No slow creeps down the gravel road. Not even a passing glance from their so-called compliance vehicle. For the first time in weeks, the ranch felt quiet again. I could step out onto the porch in the morning, coffee in hand, and not wonder whether my mailbox had been turned into scrap metal overnight. It was still standing straight, solid, and untouched. But I knew better than to think they'd just walk away. HOA types don't take defeat kindly, especially when it comes from someone they thought they had under control. Then, on the fourth morning, something strange happened. I noticed tire tracks in the dirt, fresh ones. They curved up onto the grass, stopping just a few feet from the fence. There was no reason for a car to be there. No package delivery, no visitors, and definitely no wildlife that could have left such clean marks. I looked around but didn't see a vehicle. Just the tracks and a small, white paper stuck between the slats of my fence. It was a letter. No envelope. Just a folded printout, typed in bold letters and signed with the HOA seal. It wasn't mailed. It was placed there deliberately, like they didn't even want the post office involved. The letter accused me of creating a safety hazard at the edge of the road, claimed that the new mailbox structure posed a risk to drivers, pedestrians, and emergency service vehicles. They demanded I remove it within 5 business days to avoid legal escalation. They even highlighted a local county code number, hoping it would sound official enough to scare me. But I wasn't buying it. First of all, my ranch isn't under their jurisdiction. I double-checked the land surveys years ago. Their reach ends 3 plots before mine. Second, the county code they quoted, it didn't even apply to rural roads. I looked it up myself, then confirmed with the county clerk. My mailbox was 100% legal. Height, distance from the road, materials, everything. If anything, they were the ones trespassing by delivering fake notices without permission. So, I did what any calm rancher would do. I printed a copy of the county code myself, highlighted the key part in yellow. Then I wrote a note in pen, "Nice try. Now stay off my property." I stuck it back in the fence, right where they'd left theirs. I didn't hear from them again that day. But that night, something new happened. Around 11:30 p.m., I was finishing up some barn work when I noticed headlights down by the road, not moving, just sitting still, pointing straight at the mailbox from across the way. Too far for me to see the license plate, but close enough to make the hairs on my neck rise. I turned off my own lights and stood in the dark, watching. The vehicle didn't move for almost 5 minutes. Then it slowly backed up, turned around, and disappeared. No one knocked it over. No one got out. But they were watching. It was a message, same as a fake letter. They didn't like being outplayed. They couldn't win with impact. So now they were trying pressure, trying fear. But intimidation doesn't work too well out here. Not when you've got more land than they've got rules. Still, I took it seriously. The next morning, I installed a trail camera on the tree near the mailbox. One of those motion-triggered ones I usually use to track coyotes and deer. This time, it was for a different kind of predator. I positioned it just right, camouflaged into bark, so no one would know it was there. Every time a car passed by or slowed down, it would record a clip, day or night, rain or shine. And sure enough, it didn't take long. 2 nights later, the same SUV showed up again. They stopped. This time, the passenger got out, walked up to the mailbox, looked it over, took a photo, then got back in and left. They weren't done. They were gathering something, probably hoping to prove some kind of violation, maybe even planning to file a complaint with the county. But I had everything on my side, law, proof, and now video. They thought this was going to be easy. Just another homeowner to steamroll, another mailbox to flatten. But what they didn't know was that they'd crossed the wrong fence line. And this time, there was no going back. By now, I was sure of 2 things. First, the HOA wasn't going to stop just because their little prank didn't work anymore. And second, they didn't know when to quit. Most people would have taken a hint after hitting a mailbox hard enough to shake their bumper. But these folks, they were so obsessed with control, they'd rather risk embarrassing themselves again than admit they'd lost. That's when I realized I needed to be smarter. Stronger wasn't enough. They'd try to find a weakness, a crack, anything they could call a violation. So I decided to turn the tables and make everything so precise, so clean, so legally airtight that they'd have nothing to stand on. I started by documenting everything. I took photos of the mailbox from every angle, measured the height, the distance from the road, and even the depth of the concrete base. I saved the county code, printed again, and stapled a laminated copy inside my barn, just in case someone tried to get cute with code violations or legal talk. I knew the rules better than they did now, and I had every piece of evidence to back it up. Then I went a step further. I started reading stories online. Forums filled with ranchers, homeowners, and even a few ex-HOA board members who'd left after seeing how things really worked. It was like opening a vault. Story after story of people being harassed, fined for ridiculous reasons, or stalked by fake enforcers who weren't even elected officials. One guy got fined for having a basketball hoop slightly visible from the street. Another got letters because his dog barked too enthusiastically. But a few of them, they fought back and won. And those were the stories I paid attention to most. One post in particular stuck with me. A guy from Texas had a similar problem. People kept backing into his mailbox because of a narrow turn on his street. He solved it by building what he called a sleeper post. Not illegal, not dangerous, just invisible reinforcement. The mailbox looked normal, but underneath, steel, rubber, concrete, and a little engineering magic. If someone hit it, it didn't cause injury. It just reminded them that maybe, just maybe, they should pay attention next time. Inspired, I decided to upgrade mine a little more. I added a swing arm mount behind the box. You couldn't see it unless you bent down underneath. It allowed the mailbox to flex just slightly if it got nudged, absorbing a hit, then swinging right back into place. No damage, no mess, and no excuses. I even added rubber spacers to reduce noise and impact. Completely safe, totally legal, and a complete nightmare for anyone trying to destroy it on purpose. The trail cam, I upgraded that too. Higher resolution, wider angle, and a second backup unit hidden across the road in the tree line. Now, no matter what time they showed up, I'd catch them in the act. License plates, faces, the works. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. I was building a wall, one silent piece at a time. Meanwhile, the HOA started sending more letters. This time, they didn't even pretend to be polite. One said I was in violation of the community's aesthetic harmony. Another threatened to escalate matters through municipal enforcement channels. The best one accused me of obstructing visibility, even though the mailbox hadn't moved an inch from where it was originally installed years ago. I read every letter calmly, filed them away, and never responded, because they weren't worth responding to. Without jurisdiction, their threats were just paper, just noise. I knew that, but I wanted to see how far they'd go, how desperate they'd get once their usual tactics didn't work. And slowly, they started to unravel. One morning, I caught a guy in a reflective vest parked just beyond my fence. He was pointing a tablet at my property, pretending to take measurements. I walked right up to the fence, didn't say a word, and watched. He didn't even make eye contact, just muttered something about mapping for road safety, and drove off. But I knew what he was really doing. They were looking for cracks, for something, anything, they could twist into a violation or a code breach. But there weren't any. I had built everything exactly by the book, even better than the book, and every scare tactic they tried, just more fuel to keep going. They thought they could wear me down, that eventually I'd give up, but what they didn't get was I had all the time in the world, and I was just getting started. It wasn't long before the gossip started. Ranch communities like mine aren't exactly bustling cities, but word travels faster than wildfire when the HOA's up to something shady. A neighbor 2 plots down stopped me at the feed store. He leaned in and asked if I'd really reinforce a mailbox like a tank. I didn't say yes, and I didn't say no. I just smiled and said it hadn't fallen over since. He chuckled and muttered something about wishing he'd thought of it first. Turns out, I wasn't the only one getting visits from the self-declared HOA patrol. Another neighbor said they'd been poking around a shed, claiming they were checking for unauthorized structures. Someone else got a letter about their windmill being a possible eyesore. These weren't real concerns. It was a pattern, pressure, and it meant only one thing. They were trying to retaliate against anyone they thought might be siding with me. And yet, the one thing they hadn't done again was touch the mailbox. That mailbox had become more than just a post on the side of a dusty road. It was a symbol, a quiet statement that said, I see what you're doing, and you're not going to win. But while they avoided direct hits, they started circling in other ways. One night, well after dark, my motion sensor lights flipped on by the barn. I grabbed my flashlight, walked out, and sure enough, there were tire tracks just beyond the fence, leading up toward the ditch and back out again. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, but someone had definitely stopped by, probably hoping to catch me slipping, maybe looking for something to report. That's when I got serious about documenting everything. I wasn't just installing cameras anymore. I was saving logs, footage backed up to the cloud, license plates tracked. I even installed a GPS unit inside the trail cam housing in case they tried to steal it. Everything they did from now on would become part of file. Then came the real surprise. About a week later, I got a call, not from the HOA, but from the actual county zoning department. A real officer, real badge. He asked if I'd be available to talk about a complaint that had been filed. I agreed, calmly. He showed up 2 days later, polite, clipboard in hand, standing just outside my gate like a man who respected boundaries. That was the first good sign. He walked up the road with me, checked out the mailbox, took a few pictures, and compared some measurements. He looked amused more than anything. When I asked what the complaint was, he said that your mailbox is made out of reinforced steel and meant to harm drivers. I almost laughed. Instead, I calmly explained the materials, showed him the specs, and even handed over a printed sheet of the county regulations, highlighted and stapled just like before. He read it, nodded, and said, "This is all well within code. In fact, I wish more folks followed it this closely." Then he glanced back at the road and added, "Looks like somebody's upset they can't push you around." We shook hands. He left. That was the end of the official visit. But not the end of the trouble. Because later that night, someone tried to damage the camera. Not the mailbox, the camera. I saw it in the footage. A tall man in a hoodie crept up around 1:14 a.m., tried to wedge something underneath the lens, then ran when the secondary motion light came on. The video was grainy, but I recognized the figure. Same build as a passenger from the HOA SUV. Same shoes. Same little limp in the right leg. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't trying to win by rules anymore. They were trying to erase the evidence. Rewrite the story. Pretend none of this ever happened. But every step they took made it worse for them. Because I wasn't just a rancher with camera and a strong mailbox. I was now the guy with the story, and every move they made was another paragraph I could use. By morning, I had clipped the footage, labeled it, and added it to my running file. Not for court, not yet, but just in case. I didn't want trouble. I didn't want to fight. But I wasn't going to roll over either. Not when I'd done everything by the book. So I waited again. Not with fear, this time with calm. Because the game had changed. And deep down, I knew they were starting to feel it. A few mornings later, I woke up to something strange. Absolute silence. Not a single tire crunch on gravel. Not even a faint hum of a car idling near the mailbox. For weeks, I'd grown used to some kind of noise every day, usually followed by something petty, trash in the ditch, a new fake letter, or a weird visit in the middle of the night. But this morning, nothing. And that silence wasn't peaceful. It felt like the kind of quiet before a storm. I walked out to the fence line like I always did, coffee in hand. Checked the mailbox. Still standing. Still perfect. No scratches, no dents. But something felt off. I scanned the ground around the post and noticed a small pile of gravel just off to the side. Looked like someone had tried to dig, then gave up, maybe testing if the post could be loosened. It hadn't been there yesterday. That's when I knew. They were shifting tactics again. The HOA wasn't going to risk another blatant hit and run. Not with all the attention the camera footage was likely drawing now. So instead of smashing things, they were probing, testing my patience. Try to chip away slowly, hoping I'd get tired of the constant poking and just remove the mailbox myself. But they didn't know how stubborn I could be. Later that day, I got a knock on the door. This time, it wasn't an officer. It was a man in business casual, pressed khakis, HOA badge on his chest, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as community liaison for the neighborhood association, said he was conducting a courtesy inspection. I stood in the doorway, didn't invite him in. He started talking about community cohesion, how they were trying to make sure everyone's property aligned with long-term vision goals, and how non-standard roadside fixtures could sometimes become points of contention. I waited until he finished, then asked one simple question. "Do you have jurisdiction here?" He paused, blinked, then said, "Well, we have certain community partnerships with bordering areas." I cut him off. "This isn't a bordering area. This is private ranch land. You're trespassing." He fumbled for words. I could tell he wasn't expecting resistance. Definitely not this kind of firm pushback. He mumbled something about sending a follow-up letter and started backing off. I didn't threaten him, didn't raise my voice, but I did something else. I pointed right to the trail camera. "Just so you know," I said, "everything's recorded, day and night." He glanced at the lens. Then he turned around and walked straight back to his car. Didn't even bother with a goodbye. After he left, I sat down and started thinking. It was becoming clear the HOA had no idea what to do with someone like me. Most people folded after a few letters or a face-to-face with one of their so-called compliance officers. But when all that failed and the mailbox stood tall like a middle finger made of steel and concrete, they started scrambling. Still, I knew that wasn't their last attempt. 3 nights later, just before midnight, the lower trail cam, hidden across the road, picked up something that made my stomach turn. A man in a dark hoodie and gloves got out of the car, walked up to the mailbox, and this time, he wasn't holding a phone. He was holding a crowbar. I watched as he swung once, hard, but the box barely budged. He tried again, aiming lower. The sound of steel hitting steel rang out loud, but the post didn't move. He got more frustrated, yanked on the mount, tried to pry it loose. Then the best part happened. The swing arm underneath kicked in. Instead of the mailbox resisting with brute force, it absorbed the energy and flexed just enough to throw the man off balance. He stumbled, tripped over the edge of the ditch, and fell flat on his back. Lay there for a few seconds, then scrambled up and ran back to the vehicle. The video was perfect. Clean angle, clear image, full license plate. That morning, I printed a still frame from the clip and mailed it. Not emailed. Mailed it to the HOA's registered office address. No note, no explanation. Just a picture. Let them make of it what they would. I knew that move would either shut them up for good or make them desperate. But whatever was coming next, I was ready. Because this wasn't about a mailbox anymore. This was about something they didn't expect to find on this quiet little stretch of gravel road. A fight they couldn't win with letters or cheap threats. The next few days felt different. Like something invisible had shifted. No more early morning letters shoved halfway into the mailbox. No more SUV crawling past with the same tinted windows and fake decals. Even the usual flyers they used to stuff in my gate were gone. It was too quiet, again, but this time it felt like something was brewing, something planned. I checked the cameras constantly. Nothing. Just the wind nudging the trees, a few deer passing through the fence line, and one dusty pickup that always drove too fast down the road. It felt like they were regrouping, probably watching to see how I'd react after sending them that photo. But I wasn't rattled. I wasn't going to make the first move either. I let the silence do its work, let them sit with that image, proof that one of their own had crossed a serious line. And they didn't know how much more I had. For all they knew, I had multiple angles, a full name, maybe even sent the footage to the sheriff. The truth? I hadn't done any of that yet, but I would if I had to. The silence held for 4 days. Then on the 5th, they came back in full swing. First, a new compliance notice appeared in my mailbox. Hand-delivered. No return address. No HOA logo. Just a typed letter claiming I had installed unauthorized surveillance equipment visible from a public road. I laughed out loud when I read it. They were trying to flip the narrative now, turn my legal camera into problem. But I knew better. I checked the local laws again. Cameras on private property? Absolutely legal, especially when aimed only at your own land. The HOA couldn't touch it. But this letter wasn't really about rules. It was a warning, dressed up like a regulation. Then came the second move, a knock at the gate. Same khaki pants liaison as before, only this time he brought someone with him. A woman in a pencil skirt and sunglasses, holding a clipboard with too many tabs. They didn't enter. Just stood there like they were posing for a brochure. I walked up slow, arms folded. Just following up, the man said, "Fake smile in place." "On what?" I asked. "Community concerns." The woman jumped in. Some residents feel observed. I tilted my head. "You mean the cameras?" "Exactly. You see, we're trying to maintain a sense of trust, and having cameras pointed at public areas can cause discomfort." "Discomfort," I repeated, dragging the word out. Sounds like a personal problem. They both glanced at each other. Then the woman spoke again. "We're requesting that you angle or reposition them away from the road." I didn't answer right away. I just stared, let the quiet get heavy. Finally, I said, "Let me get this straight. You're asking me to reduce security on my own property because people who've trespassed, vandalized, and sent fake officers don't like being caught on camera?" That shut them up. They stood there a moment longer. Then she muttered, "We'll be documenting this." And they left. That told me everything I needed to know. They were trying to reframe me as the aggressor, like I was the one causing the trouble. Not the mailbox getting run over, not the crowbars in the night, not the phony patrols. Just me and my camera catching it all. But they made a mistake. That little visit, I filmed it. Both mics on, both cams rolling. And their request to tamper with my cameras? It wasn't just overreach. It bordered on harassment. I added that video to the folder, labeled time-stamped, backed up twice. I wasn't planning to go public. Not yet. But I had everything I needed if I ever had to. That night, I walked out to the mailbox again, ran my hand over the top. It had a few scuff marks now, but it was still standing firm. The swing arm was still tight. Camera still panning just fine. The wind was picking up, clouds rolling in overhead. A storm was coming. And the HOA, with all their games and fake authority, had no clue how deep they'd dug themselves. They thought I was some isolated rancher with nothing but free time and stubborn pride. They didn't realize I had patience like the land itself, and a whole lot of ammo they'd given me, one dirty trick at a time. The storm didn't take long to arrive, only it wasn't the kind that brought thunder or rain. It came with a fat manila envelope delivered straight to my front gate, not by mail, but dropped off by hand. Inside, a stack of papers with official-looking headers. HOA letterhead, stamped in red, titled, "Notice of Violation, Code Enforcement Pending." At first glance, it looked serious. Terms like nuisance infrastructure, unauthorized reinforcement, and dangerous obstruction adjacent to community access road jumped out at me. They had turned my mailbox, the same one they'd rammed repeatedly, into a supposed threat to public safety. They were trying to escalate. Hard. I read every word, front and back. Pages full of vague legalese, invented claims, and unverified statements. They even referenced a fictional eyewitness who claimed I booby-trapped the post. That made me laugh out loud. But underneath the absurdity, I knew their tactic. They wanted to provoke me into reacting irrationally, tear it down in frustration, respond with threats, give them ammo. So I didn't. I responded with something better, paper. The next day, I paid a visit to my lawyer. Not just any lawyer. This was a guy who specialized in rural property disputes, HOAs, and overreach cases. I handed him the envelope, told him the full story, and then I sat back as he skimmed the documents, expression never changing. When he finally looked up, he said one word, "Weak." Apparently, this wasn't the first time this HOA had pulled stunts like this. There was already a record of complaints, half a dozen, scattered across the last 3 years. Most never made it to court, but they all followed the same formula. Push, provoke, then sue if you push back. He advised me to draft a counter notice. Not just a denial, but a formal complaint. We listed every incident, dated and backed with evidence. Photos, video, even statements from neighbors. We attached the county's regulations confirming my mailbox was fully compliant. And we copied the sheriff's office, just for good measure. I didn't need to file it yet. Just having it ready was enough. It was a loaded trap. One they'd fall into the minute they pushed the wrong button. Still, I knew they wouldn't stop there. This wasn't just about control. It was about ego. They'd run their little kingdom unchecked for years, and now I was a nail sticking up. But the thing about nails is, if you hammer hard enough without thinking, you hit steel. And they did. 3 nights later, someone tried again. Not the mailbox this time, but the power box of my cameras. They came from the rear fence line, through the trees. I found fresh boot prints. They snipped the cable with bolt cutters and ran. Thought they'd won. But what they didn't know was I'd already upgraded everything to solar and battery backup the week before. The cables they cut, they were decoys, dummy wires. The real system was recording the whole thing from 2 angles. The guy was in and out in 40 seconds. face half covered. But the shoes, the walk, even to make his jacket, it all matched one of the liaisons. I didn't even need to enhance the footage to know who it was. By morning, I'd emailed the video to my lawyer, the sheriff, and, just for fun of it, to the HOA's Community Integrity Committee. No message, no warning, just footage attached labeled Incident 6, Unauthorized Tampering with Electrical Property, 2:03 a.m. By noon, I got a call. Not from the HOA, from the sheriff's office. They wanted to discuss a few things. Not an interrogation, not an accusation. Just a conversation about all the evidence I've been sitting on. The deputy showed up in uniform, polite, respectful. We sat on the porch, and I walked him through everything. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The footage and documents told the story better than I could. When he left, he said something that stuck. Folks like that usually stop when they realize they're being watched harder than they're watching. That was the first time I felt the pressure shift completely. They weren't chasing me anymore. I was watching them run in circles. Every move they made left a trail. Every threat they whispered became a file in my case. And somewhere deep in their offices, they were probably realizing they'd picked a fight not just with a rancher, but with someone who knew how to turn their games into their downfall. A week passed with no letters, no visits, no shady vehicles rolling by the gate. It should have felt like a win, like peace had finally returned to my stretch of land. But when you've been poked, lied to, and threatened for months, that kind of silence doesn't feel calm. It feels loaded. And I was right to be suspicious. I noticed it around dusk. The kind of light where everything's still visible, but shadows are just starting to stretch. I was walking along the fence, doing my usual evening loop, when I spotted something strange tucked into the weeds near the mailbox. A tiny black object, no bigger than a cigarette lighter. At first, I thought it was trash. But when I crouched and picked it up, I realized exactly what it was: a wireless pinhole camera. Small, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. And recently placed, too. The grass around it hadn't had time to grow around the base. I stared at it for a while, turned it over in my hand. They'd tried to spy on me. After all the cameras, the mailbox, the sheriff visits, and the lawyer's letter, they still had the nerve to sneak surveillance onto my land, right by the very thing they'd been attacking for weeks. It was desperation, pure and simple. They weren't gathering evidence. They were hoping I'd finally snap, maybe catch me screaming at someone, maybe looking like the aggressor. Anything they could twist and present as proof to file a complaint, or worse, take to court. But all they'd done was bury themselves deeper. Instead of removing the device, I took pictures of it from every angle, with my phone, with the trail cam. I even recorded a video of myself finding it, with date and time. Then I gently placed it back exactly where I found it. Let them keep watching. Let them think they were being clever. Because what they didn't know is that I had already turned one of their own into an ally. A few days prior, a young HOA assistant, new, not one of the regular ones, had come by with a flyer about community improvement funding. He was clearly nervous, kept glancing around like he wasn't supposed to be there. We talked briefly, and I kept it friendly. Something about his energy told me he wasn't like the others. So, before he left, I handed him a bottle of cold water and said, "If you ever feel like someone's pushing you to do something shady, come talk to me first." I didn't think much of it, but apparently he did. That night, around 10 p.m., I got a message through my ranch Facebook page. Something I rarely check. It was from the assistant. Just a few words. They told me to put the camera. I didn't want to. It wasn't my idea. I'm sorry. No name. No follow-up. But I knew who it was. And I also knew this meant their house of cards was starting to wobble from the inside. By the next morning, I had drafted another legal notice. This time, directly accusing the HOA of unlawful surveillance, trespassing, and privacy violations, all back with photos, videos, and a message from the assistant. I didn't send it just yet. I wanted them to sweat. Instead, I let word leak. I called a neighbor, one of the few who had always stayed neutral, told him casually about the camera. Then that night, over at the local diner, I heard the story repeated, twice, from two different tables. Each version getting a little more dramatic Of course. In one, they said the HOA had hired private spies. In another, someone claimed the board president was installing trackers on residents' trucks. Let them run wild. The truth was bad enough. The rumors? Even worse for them. Because once trust is gone, even in a community with painted mailboxes and fancy street signs, things fall apart fast. Neighbors start watching each other. People question motives. And the HOA, they start losing their grip. And that's when I realized something bigger than revenge was happening. I hadn't just offended my mailbox. I'd become the crack in the system they thought was untouchable. I didn't ask for that role, but I wasn't about to back down from it either.